Hello everyone, and welcome back to Bright Onion Music Discussion. Apologies, it has been a very long time, I know. We actually had a video on Thom Yorke, I don't know, 8 months ago, but it kind of fell through. We weren't happy with the project, so it got dropped, and then life got busy. But I've decided now to, especially now that there's kind of a worldwide quarantine going on of sorts, bring back the channel for a bit, just because I, had the kind of desire to just jump back in and talk about what I like, which is my favorite artists, favorite music. So I'm going to start basically, the solo series, talking about some artists that, we have covered on the show and some artists we haven't covered on the show. So some of the new ones I'm going to talk about, could be like Audiker or My Bloody Valentine or Swans or Godspeed You Black Emperor or like King Crimson, Pink Floyd. I have those kind of bands on the queue to do a bit of a deep dive on their discographies. And for some of them I'm also going to rank the albums. So definitely some of those bands are going to have some ranking videos at some point. But for now, I wanted to start with, in my opinion, the easiest band for me to rank, because I've been the fan the longest, like out of I think any of my other favorite bands. So I'm gonna basically do a mini review and rank of the Radiohead discography and the Thom Yorke discography and the Atoms for Peace discography, all in one video. Of course, if you've watched any videos from this channel, or especially watched any of the Radiohead videos that we've made, you know that we already did a discussion about Radiohead as a whole. You can check that video out, it's from a few years ago. We also did at the time, around the same time as that video, a top 11 songs. And, that's kind of outdated, I guess, in a bit, because opinions change. It's hard to completely, keep the same opinions on art over years. So this is kind of a bit of a update, I guess. But also I'm taking into context, the album ranking with each other, not using the tier system that we used to. I'm just going to rank them in terms of what's better than the next. I'm going to go worst to best. And also because we didn't get that Thom Yorke video out, and I still want to talk about Thom Yorke's solo work, I'm going to lump in Thom Yorke's albums into this as well. And I'm including Atoms for Peace because I find that to be essentially a Thom Yorke album. Like, of course, it has guest musicians, but the overall sound is, I'd say, pretty consistent with his other solo albums, just maybe a little more polished and has a bit more of a full band feel. So I'm going to start right off with the lowest place on the list, which would, I guess, be number 14, and that's going to be the Suspiria soundtrack from 2018. It's a good release, don't get me wrong. I think that Thom Yorke did something very unique with this album, which is make like horror ambient, something he definitely had not dabbled in before, really at all. And interspersed within the tracks of the Suspiria soundtrack were some really pretty, Thom Yorke solo pieces that had piano or guitar and relatively conventional arrangements, but were just fantastic songs. So overall, as an album, of course, it's not really meant to be listened to as an album like any of his other solo albums, but it is a really good soundtrack. I'm not really one to watch horror movies, so I never actually checked out Suspiria itself, the movie it was made for, and I don't know if I will. But listening to it without the movie, it was still really interesting and very surreal, very abstract, and the soundscapes were pretty terrifying sometimes. And yeah, really that you can take out of the album though to listen to out of context are the really fantastic individual tracks that stand out, which are the ones that of course have vocals usually and are the more song type. So Suspirium, the lead single for the if you can call it a lead single for the soundtrack, Really, really nice hypnotic piano ballad by Thom. Uh, Really great, like floating ghostly vocals, a simple but very effective arrangement, and a real like earworm, that song. And then I have to mention the most brilliant track from that time by him, which is Unmade. Just an absolutely beautiful song. About a little over 5 minutes, but it just like soars, and his voice just kind of like stretches and floats and just cascades over the beautiful piano arrangement and the choirs and the synths. It's a really nice track. I think it honestly is some of his best work. That song. And then there's some other ones too. Like I like Have Ended a lot. I like Open Again, and the Suspirium finale is really good too. A kind of reprise of the Suspirium track, but in a longer arrangement with strings and a much more of a soundtrack feel to it. But really, really solid tracks. But overall, as an album, not one that I'm really gonna listen to again for a long time. Not one that I really return to. But in a playlist of favorite Thom Yorke songs, taking those 3 or 4, 5 really standout tracks that are more like classic Thom Yorke songs. Those are very good. So yeah, number 13 on the list is going to be Thom Yorke's Tomorrow's Modern Boxes. It's his 2014 album. I really do like it. It's a short album. I think it's under 40 minutes, but the same length as King of Limbs. And it's good. It's good. It has a very unique production style to it that sounds almost like kind of lo-fi. Like you can tell he made it and produced it all himself. I mean, he probably had the help of I know he had the help of Nigel Godrich and actually Colin Greenwood too, a little bit in the production. But generally, it sounds like a very like homemade album, and that's a really nice aesthetic that I actually do like for it. And it has some fantastic tracks as well. I really like Interference. It's short and sweet, but it's very, very somber and haunting. And then there's Truth Ray, which has just these really emotional like pulsing synths and just this broken sounding vocal, which really gets me. And also The Mother Lode is a more pop type track that he's made, but really good. Aphex Twin IDM style percussion and kind of the same kind of ghostly vocal that he employs on a lot of his solo work recently, but really effective here. A lot of delay and echo and looping, and really good. And I think people call this section a little bit of the weaker part of the album, but I really like the about 10 minutes or so that's just instrumental on the album. There Is No Ice and Pink section. I think that's developed some really cool soundscapes, very alien. I think I had a greater appreciation for this album after playing the Polyphona game they released for iOS and I think for Android, but I use it on my iPad. This is back in 2014. They released this strange like augmented reality game where you'd use, of course, your camera of your device, and like it would kind of it wouldn't actually like scan and change things that you see around you, but the game would move with your camera, and you can basically explore really strange like pretty alien animated terrain, like 3D animated terrain. And it was very like kaleidoscopic, very trippy, really interesting though. And the music, the background music for that, at first when it was released, was set to some like strange remixes of the King of Limbs tracks. But after Thom Yorke's solo album was released, Tomorrow's Modern Boxes, they used like layers of that song or that album, songs from that album, in the background of Polyphona, and that it totally fit the game. And, the game totally fit the music, and I had a pretty good appreciation for the songs and what he was going for a style after that. So good stuff. But overall, not my favorite Thom Yorke album. A relatively weaker one, but had some good standouts, interesting production style, it's just very brief, and there's not a ton of content really to even go through. And I just think that the other ones that he's released has kind of overshadowed it a little bit. But next, I'm going to get into the number 12 spot on the list, and this is the first Radiohead album that I'm going to rank, and that is Pablo Honey. So Pablo Honey is given a bit of a bad rap. It's a little unfair, the the comments usually made about Pablo Honey. It's been kind of memed, I guess, as like their default worst album. And while I can't disagree that it's their worst album as a band, it's just it's a little unfair, the fact that it's up against such incredible releases that really overshadow it. So it can't really compete when you have, you know, like In Rainbows or like Kid A or even like the next album, The Bends, they released up against it. You know, it's like, it's a little unfair. For a start, it's fantastic, actually. For a debut album, it's really good. It's a pretty solid album the whole way through. It's only 40 minutes, so if you haven't really listened to it and you've been kind of avoiding it or just had no desire to listen to it because people always tell you it's not worth it or whatever, and you're a Radiohead fan, check it out. I mean, it's 40 minutes of new Radiohead content, and that's not bad. You can see a lot of their earlier styles coming through, and you know, of course, the album doesn't sound that unique from what was going on at the time, but you can sense a lot of you know, like the impetus of things that would come, right? They use some interesting time signatures. They use a pretty like emotive style of lyricism, singing, songwriting that they really expand on in later albums. It has a really like good focus on individual detail in the music and the composition. You know, they have 3 guitarists, and all of them are doing something very interesting on each track, and you know, layering their guitar work in interesting ways. The songs are interesting to listen to in that way, and you know, songwriting's fine. It just hasn't aged as well as the other ones, yes, and the production style isn't as good as the other ones, yes. They didn't have John Leckie, and they didn't have, of course, Nigel Godrich, who they had for most of their albums, on that. The album cover's kind of stupid, yeah, but like it's a solid album. Doesn't deserve to be hated on. It's just the fact that it's overshadowed by everything else they've done that makes it kind of by default their worst. But yeah, I still enjoy it from time to time. Alright, so next on the list, we're getting into the albums now that I actually own on vinyl, so I'm going to bring out the vinyl as I talk about them. But next on the list is going to be AMOK by Atoms for Peace. So, AMOK is solid. It's not one you should skip, I think, if you're a Radiohead fan. I really like the production style on it. It's very smooth, very silky, and you can hear a lot of detail in the composition. And you can hear, all the intricate rhythms, kind of flavoring different parts of the songs, and they all come through and really make for good re-listenability value. Thom Yorke's vocals are, very smooth, very falsetto oriented, and really are not the focus of this music. The focus is most definitely the grooves and rhythms and deep, intricate layering that they do on every track. I really love the opener on this album, Before Your Very Eyes. It's a pretty consistent groove, pretty long song that that has some really sweet vocals, and has a really nice change up about in the middle where they change the main instrument, which is kind of this looping guitar, to a synth. Well, I guess kind of 2 bouncing synths that match what the guitar was doing in a really interesting way. I love the track. Oh, also the bass lines are great. It's good to mention that Flea from Red Hot Chili Peppers lends his bass skills to this album. It's not at all like a funk album. You can't really compare this to anything Red Hot Chili Peppers have done, but the bass lines are solid. Of course, the rhythm section is the real focus of this album in the first place. But also, a good thing to mention is that the synth work is fantastic too. I think it's Nigel Godrich and Thom Yorke that did the synths, and all the synths they use are haunting, colorful, tasteful, and they really lend a lot to the song. I'm thinking of moments like the song "Reverse Running," how it has this like very spiraling, eerie synth that comes in, in the second half of the song, and then the final track "AMOK," which is easily the standout on this album, just having this very like kind of abrasive rhythm and these spooky synths going on with a kind of repetitive song structure that just builds and gets darker and darker. Really good stuff. It's really only lower on this list just because it's hard to compete with some of the stuff later on the in the Radiohead discography and the remainder of the Thom Yorke albums, but it is a solid release. So next I'm going to talk about the most recent album released by any of these bands, and that is Anima by Thom Yorke. Anima is it was one of my favorite albums of 2019, and I think it's obviously there's one Thom Yorke album left, but it's up there. It's really good. I think it kind of refines the sound that he was going for a little bit on Tomorrow's Modern Boxes, yet also sounds quite a bit different. It has a lot more depth to its soundstage and a lot more depth to its I guess just song composition in general. He has tons and tons of detail, tons and tons of layering on this album, and a really interesting aesthetic to its sound. Also, in many tracks, it's very like dancey, very rhythmic. I guess pulling what he expanded on in Atoms for Pieces album, and I don't know, really good stuff. I think that the track Dawn Chorus is one of his most emotionally stunning tracks he's made. It's very understated, very mellow, very calm, and honestly it doesn't have really much in way of melody at all, but the growing, expanding, just absolutely beautiful synths that kind of creep around the song and get take it over by the end, mixed with the kind of softly spoken lyrics, just really elevate the track. So a real highlight there. But I also really love some of the groovier tracks like Twist, The Axe, Traffic, Not the News is really cool. The way that song evolves is quite fantastic. And also like Impossible Knots, which is the most Atoms for Peace like track on this. Really good. And the short film directed by Paul Thomas Anderson, fantastic, really good choreography, and also made me appreciate this album a lot more. This really works well with that the video really complements it. So yeah, next off I'm going to go to the next Radiohead album that would be on this list, and that would be The King of Limbs. The King of Limbs is, yes, admittedly one of the weaker Radiohead albums, but it still has a lot to be enjoyed. It's brief, it's short, but I don't really find that necessarily inhibits its quality, as some people do. It's an album I've listened to a ton, and the first half is very rhythmic, very dense, very cold, and there's not too much, I guess, like emotion to be gained from those four. It's more like just interesting for your brain to kind of pick at. But really fun rhythms in that first half, especially on Morning Mr. Magpie and Feral. But then the second half opens up, is a lot more emotionally vulnerable, has this fantastically groovy track with some of the best vocals on the album. Lotus Flower has the soft, somber, kind of like underwater piano ballad of Codex, and has the Thom Yorke's strange campfire ballad, Give Up the Ghost, and then ends with the really nice atmospheric, just gorgeous Separator, with its really groovy looped beat and the very bright guitar that comes in near the end that everyone loves. So I don't know, it's a solid album. I just think that it would be much higher on the list if they, honestly, if they somehow worked in some of the bonus tracks, because when I listen to this album now, I have kind of a disc I burned for my car that is this album plus its 5 B-sides, and those are, Super Collider, The Butcher, and Daily Mail, Staircase, and These Are My Twisted Words. I consider those all to be kind of, the same era as this. Some of them have a different sound than the album, but overall, played afterwards, I think make the album very worth it to listen to, and I love it that way. As its own original 8-track format, while I think, again, being short does not hurt the album, I just think that there's not enough content here that's that remarkable to really push it up in the list. But I do still really enjoy this album, and I listen to it quite a bit. And I love the From the Basement live performance as well. Really breathes more life into these tracks. So next off, the final Thom Yorke album on this list, and that would be The Eraser from 2006. Thom Yorke's first album, released after the band released Hail to the Thief, and before In Rainbows was released. Really, really solid and very emotionally stunning work. This album is very much about climate change, which is something that, Thom Yorke still has on his mind all the time, and you can tell through his music. But he was really freaking out in the 2000s, and it really permeated into all of his work. Rightfully so. It's a worrying issue that's only gotten worse, and Thom Yorke was was railing on about how people should be ready, and people should be careful, and people should be aware, protesting what's going on back in the year 2000, and now in 2020, it's more relevant than ever. And this album really focuses on themes of the government, or corrupt people, basically avoiding the impending problem of climate change, and climate scientists and advocates, being either silenced or being ignored or just being doubted. And the album cover depicts a guy that's trying to hold back a coming tsunami, and it's pretty obvious what that is supposed to mean, considering the climate change angle. And this album's just very angry and very, very bitter about these kind of topics. Songs about the clock, talking about how the government essentially is essentially wasting time, putting money into things that are not as relevant and not as urgent as dealing with the climate crisis, and just throwing coins in a wishing well, hoping that it'll go away. And then a song like Hair Down Hell, a pretty biting, angry take on the I can't remember what the guy's name was, but the death of a prominent, I believe it was a climate journalist who had a disappearance, and was saying some pretty provoking things that clearly some authorities didn't like. That's at least Thom Yorke's take on it. And a pretty angry song. Thom Yorke, in an interview around this time, did mention the fact that he wishes that his voice was a little more, had a little more edge to it, because when he sings, it sounds like soothing and soft, and sometimes when he wants to get across a really angry message, he just can't, because of the nature of his voice sounding so, I guess, like polite. And that really, I really find that to be an interesting contrast on this album, where his voice is just so nice. It really focuses on his voice more than most Radiohead albums at the time, and still. And a lot of the songs, despite being very electronic and very laptop made, they have a surprising and very high amount of emotional effectiveness, and some of the best tracks he's ever made on here. Anyway, definitely the most essential Thom Yorke album still. So now we get into the more difficult part of the list. So this is when I'm going to get into squarely just the rest of the Radiohead albums at this point. right? So we got 7 left. So this would be the number 7th spot on the list, and that's going to be 2016's A Moon-Shaped Pool. I really like this album. I don't listen to it a ton anymore versus when it came out in 2016, but it was really stunning when it dropped, and I think it blew a lot of people away, especially because people weren't necessarily expecting something as good after The King of Limbs, which tempered a lot of people's expectations for Radiohead. But it really shines through. It's really stunning. The really great part about this album is the fact that it's so understated and so calm and so, I guess, quiet and subtle. Yet it has this very still effective and potent emotional power to it. And that's definitely something that comes through on tracks like Daydreaming or True Love Waits or Present Tense or Glass Eyes, some of the standouts on the album in my opinion. Really, really fantastic. And then on some other areas it has like a really cool, krautrocky, alternative rock sound to it. Songs like Dex Dark or Full Stop or Identikit. And then there's some really fantastic string arrangements that Johnny Greenwood kind of wrote up for this. Like Burn the Witch has a really great string section to it. Daydreaming, of course, is elevated a ton by the string composition. And Glass Eyes as well, beautiful, stunning track in the middle of the album. And Tinker Tailor, I'm not going to say the whole title, but that track is good up until the point when the strings come in which point it becomes incredible. And I don't know. Also to note on this album, of course, is that True Love Waits was put on here after something like, almost 20 years of it just being a song they play live once in a while, that it kind of evolved over time. I do think I still prefer the earlier live version of that song. I think that the chord progression worked a little better. The brighter vocal sound too worked better. But on this album, it's just so depressing, which really works for it. But I do still prefer the earlier version. However, as an album closer, it is absolutely stunning and really leaves you in kind of a state of contemplation, and makes you have to take a deep breath after finishing this album every time. So good way to end it. And good to mention, I think, is the fact that Spectre and Ill Wind are kind of the 2 B-sides that came after this album, or before and after, and they're really good to listen to as well alongside this. I have a CD rip that I listen to where those 2 tracks follow after True Love Waits, and I think that's a good extension to the album if anyone else does that. All right, we're getting into the top 6 now, and this is where things get a little harder. But number 6 is going to be The Bends from 1995. I really like The Bends because it just shows such a great transformation from the kind of more basic sound I had on Pablo Honey to something so unique and amazing. The Bends, for being a 90s Brit rock album, is one of the best examples you can find of top quality music coming from that era. So, the songwriting, the lyricism, the rock instrumentation is so good on this album. You find some great but more basic rock songs on here, like the title track, like Bones or Sulk. But then you have some really more advanced, more progressive sounding rock on tracks like Nice Dream, which has some really interesting chord progressions, and it uses a string composition. Just, which has the so many chords just stuffed into one song, really crazy guitar solos and guitar parts, really strange rock song, but awesome. It goes hard. And then My Iron Lung, which just has this awesome switch between being kind of more tame, more almost like, I don't know, stable to being, off the rails, crazy, exploding, and I love that transition in that song between its kind of different sections. I love the pulsing bass line and the very rusty sounding guitars. And then, yeah, fantastic. Shows some new integration of interesting soundscapes into their music with Palantilex having the looped piano chords at the beginning and end, and has some really soft, beautiful ballads as well, like High and Dry, Fake Plastic Trees, and Bulletproof, I Wish I Was, which is a personal favorite of mine. But then I think the really big song on this album that stands out and makes it this high on the list for me, because I think it elevates the entire album to a new level, is the closer Street Spirit Fade Out, which is still one of my absolute favorite Radiohead songs, and songs of really any band. And that really elevates this album to a new spot. Without it honestly would be probably a few ranks lower on this list. So just shows the power of one song sometimes. But yeah, really good album. I do think that it's kind of like Pablo Honey. It can be overshadowed a bit by what comes later, but I think that it still stands out even among their later releases. Top 5. So 5. So top 5 is going to be the hardest part to rank, because some of these are very interchangeable, and I do find that these albums swap around quite a bit. So honestly, this can be taken a bit with a grain of salt. I think everything below this is pretty set. I don't know if those albums' rankings change a lot. Sometimes they do, but very often they don't. But these top 5 are very fluid. So this year, what I'm feeling after listening to these albums all recently is that Hail to the Thief is going to be my 5th place. So I love Hail to the Thief. I think I like it more than the average Radiohead fan. There have been many times when I would, without a doubt, rank this as my number 1, or at least in the top 3. If you caught me, if you asked me like last year, I probably would have said, "Oh yeah, Hail to the Thief. Oh yeah, like number 2, solid." People knock this album for its length, and I get it. It's long. It's 14 tracks. They don't really have an album that long and kind of bloated. But I do think that despite its length, every track has something great to offer, and I wouldn't skip any of them. There is, of course, that alternate track listing that brings the album down to 40 minutes and cuts out, what does it cut out? We Suck Young Blood, I Will, Punch Up at a Wedding, and Backdrifts. But I think all 4 of those tracks are indispensable, so I wouldn't cut them. I think over the years, I've definitely come to appreciate songs like Backdrifts and We Suck Young Blood a lot more, whereas those used to be my clear lowest. But honestly now, like, yeah, really, really solid. I also think one of the best tracks on this album is I Will. I think that song is 2 minutes of just pure, fantastic Thom Yorke vocals and just angry lyricism. And it's an understated but very emotional track, and I love that. But of course, you have to mention the big tracks on this album, like 2 + 2 = 5, a solid opener. And from the previous albums they released to this one, shows the transition into this new sound of angry political rock music with an electronic composition to it, where they have like a skittering, I think it's like a 7/8 time beat that goes on, and guitar arpeggios, like furiously cascading in the background. And Thom Yorke's really upfront vocals, and you have tracks like There, which is just a great growing, building kind of like rock anthem that really explodes near the end into just this awesome breakdown. And then the final track, A Wolf at the Door, really great, almost kind of like strange like rap singing that he's doing. Very, again, angry delivery. and incredible guitar arpeggios, rhythm, and build to that song. And then I really love Myxomatosis, and it's very strange, like fuzzy aesthetic. And Wherein Did You Begin is another top track of mine. Really awesome groove, really great, like kind of spiraling track, and pretty dark as well. So really good album. Something to mention too is the track "The Gloaming" I think doesn't get enough love. I love "The Gloaming," and it's really awesome, kind of like ambience and haunted atmosphere. Really cool. But it's my top 5, but my lowest of the top 5 at the moment. So next up is going to be Amnesia. I have the 10-inch vinyl. the Leftovers album from Kid A. Of course, it stands out very differently from Kid A, and is not something you should compare to it necessarily. It's a very different sound. It's darker. It's more haunting. It's more disturbing at times. Has a very cool contrast in its tracks between some being very electronic and very cold and very just dystopian, and some being more like kind of somewhat jazz influenced rock. But every track here brings something very unique to the table. There's a lot of variety in its songs, and it has some absolute standouts. Pyramid Song almost single-handedly moves this up like Street Spirit does for the Bends. Really love that track. Really love the jazz infused You and Whose Army and Life in a Glass House. Really love the intricate electronic layering in songs like Pull Revolving Doors and Packed Like Sardines in a Crushed Tin Box, and love the emotionally stunning and dark and just devastating Knives Out, Morning Bell, and Dollars and Cents. Really good stuff. I Might Be Wrong. It's fantastic, extremely dense rock track, and Like Spinning Plates is just this really weird hypnotic song that I think works better in its piano form that they play live, but still really good. So yeah, very dark, haunting, apocalyptic sounding album. But I say that, but really it's a pretty subtle, pretty I'd say like a not a very explosive or maximal album, if that's even a word, but understated, quiet, subtle, sonically dense, and very very unique. Really like it. Number 3, this is getting into the really good stuff, is going to be for me In Rainbows, 2007. I think that In Rainbows is just 10 incredible tracks back to back. There's no concept. There's no great innovation done here, but every track is just something new, a great treat. From the vibrant opening of 15 Step, it's mulched up sounding percussion, but then really, really clean, beautiful bass and guitar, and the really fun samples of the kids cheering. Really fun track. Body Snatchers, just this like absolutely distorted, dirty rock track that becomes clean about halfway through, which is a really cool breath of fresh air, and then gets back into it for the final minute or so of the song. Really love that one. Always rock out to that. Then there's Nude, just this really silky, smooth, beautiful ballad with Thom Yorke's incredible vocal performance. Weird Fishes, one of my favorite Radiohead songs. Absolutely stunning, layered, intricate, beautiful, aquatic sounding song that just you get lost in. I love the change up about halfway through. And then tracks like that, It's just a very beautiful, colorful album that's very, easy to listen to. I've listened to this album more than any other Radiohead album by far. And ends strong too. I really love the sequence of songs from Reckoner to the end. Just beautiful, beautiful tracks. Really good dynamic balance too of the more upbeat, rockier ones and the more quiet, more down tempo and more chill ones. And the amount of like just how effective this one is emotionally is something that really makes it higher up on the list too. Just some absolutely tear-jerking songs on this one. Really solid, and I think most fans would agree that this is one of their best albums. Many would put it first, but many also, probably the majority, would put it in their top 3. And that's where it is for me. Finally. Which one is it? This is such a hard choice because these two are so, so equal. But Kid A, for nostalgia purposes, has to be my first, and OK Computer is going to be my second. So OK Computer is the first album I listened to by Radiohead. Got me into the band, but I wouldn't say it got me into the band as strongly as Kid A did. But I really liked the songs when I first was getting into the band, especially near the end of the album. Lucky, The Tourist immediately caught my attention. But then as I listened to it more, I started to really appreciate the really sonically dense and complicated arrangements of the other songs, and just the actual emotional value buried beneath the really what do you call it? I don't know, like cerebral presentation of the music. So, Airbag, Paranoid Android, Exit Music, Climbing Up the Walls, all these songs have such great depth to them in terms of the sonic layering. It's really something beyond what they had been doing on the Bends. The new producer, Nigel Godrich, that they kept for the rest of the albums, added something so cool to it as well, where he really knew how to present their music in a way that's like so engaging. And the songwriting is brilliant on here. The album flow is impeccable, and the concepts of alienation and the hustle and bustle of the daily grind, and feeling disconnected and dissociation and all that. Pretty dark topics, but handled so expertly in Thom Yorke's vocal delivery of his pretty sad and dour lyrics, and the commentary and social and political commentary on this album is really interesting too, and is still relevant today, unfortunately. But really, really solid songwriting, really solid performances and production, and every song here is indispensable. Even the 2-minute, very creepy interlude, Fitter Happier, which is kind of in my opinion, the thesis statement of the album. But this album could easily be number 1. I'm really just putting it at number 2 for nostalgia purposes, whereas Kid A, to me, is just the strongest album for me. And I think always will be, but this one really got me into the band, more so than OK Computer. I listened to it second, and the vulnerable, emotional presentation on How to Disappear Completely, Everything in Its Right Place, Idiotech, and Motion Picture Soundtrack, and other songs just really, really spoke to me when I first listened to it, and still does to this day, 7 years later, after I first listened to it. And I love the spacey, otherworldly atmosphere that this album carries through it. The sense of alienation and dissociation that was originally introduced on OK Computer is just, this is like the logical conclusion of that. It sounds so disconnected, so isolated from reality, and so off in its own world. And sometimes the abstraction of its sound, makes it so good, and so unique. Really got me into electronic music, which is a big deal. I think this album opened me up to a lot of new genres, but also just the fact that I have so many good memories associated with this album, and I still love like all the tracks on it, and the fact that I whenever I want to start listening to it with Everything in Its Right Place, I have no choice really but to continue it. I just love how it flows together. Makes this undoubtedly my favorite Radiohead album. So that's the list. All 14, 9 Radiohead albums. and the 5 Thom Yorke solo albums, if you're going to count Atoms for Peace and Suspiria. And that's my ranking. Thanks for watching, and I'll be back with another video soon. I'm going to try and actually keep this channel consistently uploading. That's kind of my new goal. So expect something new. Hopefully I won't let you down. And thanks for watching.